The city, 20 years ago. The earth was silent as the lone young man trudged his way back home. The moon cast ominous shadows against the virgin snow, and his heavy boots left behind deep grooves in the powdery drifts. The city was quiet that evening, and was bathed in an unnatural smoky blue. Without warning, he stopped short, sensing that he was being followed. Turning his face to the star-swept heavens, he began to frown.
Cheapers.
His initial suspicions had indeed been correct. From his spot amidst the shadows, another, older man approached.
So, you think you have won?
The youngster chuckled bitterly within his throat. Turning around, his cloak made a light snapping sound as the icy winter winds caught the light material.
I think I've got my eye back,
he replied sourly. The latter of the two men merely stood, solemn in his intent.
Yet still, you are blind.
If you haven't noticed, I just saved the world, yourself included.
The youth snapped.
As we knew you would. As it had to be.
With an annoyed grunt, the young man shook his head and resumed his trek home. He didn't object as the other man began to keep pace with him. At least not openly.
Now I remember why I left the Keepers,
he scoffed.
And I remember why we let you go.
The young man's eyes narrowed. That was about all that he could take. He stopped walking, spun around, and looked his tormentor dead in the eyes. His right eye made a mechanical buzz as it focused upon the face of the person before him. The other eye merely glowered wickedly in his direction. He had been through hell over the last few days. Literal and complete hell. A philosophical lecture was the last thing he needed right now.
What do you want from me? Have you come to congratulate me? Welcome me back to the fold?
Very well. I will speak my piece plainly. You have accomplished what was written, and yes, you've done it well. But there is no place for you with us any longer. Yet, you will have a great need of us, and soon.
The wizened older man spoke with utmost sincerity. The reckless youth chuckled, slightly amused by the very notion. He resumed his pace.
I don't think so. I'm through with heroics, and with your kind as well,
he snarled. As he started away, the elder called after him.
You cannot run from life as you did from us, Garrett. Life has a way of finding you, no matter how artistic of sneak you are.
The city, present day. It was early morning when Guinevere awoke. She hadn't gotten all that much rest, following her conversation only hours before, but then again, she didn't need to. Guinevere could never be sure whether it was her strong constitution, her overactive mind, or perhaps something else. But she had always been able to function properly on little to no sleep. The thought had crossed her mind in the past that she might very well be insane, as this was a common trait in said individuals. But Guinevere had since discovered that this simply was not the case. Inside, she now felt tranquil and content. It was the first solace she had received in years, and she clung to it and kept it close to her very soul. Dawn's first light found Garrett trapped within the grips of slumber, and the early streaks of morning light filtered down through the roof of the clock tower, casting lazy shadows within his domain. Guinevere stood and combed her hair crudely with her long fingers. Dusting herself off, the young woman slipped behind one of the enormous gears and changed back into the outfit that her teacher had given her. After affixing the leather belt around her waist, she was ready to begin her morning regimen. She had gotten even better at stealth since deciding to make the activity part of her morning walk around town. She had also been successful in lifting several rare goods from the local merchants, which she now kept hidden underneath the floorboards nearest her sleeping spot atop the stairs. However, none of these items had been acquired using stealth, but rather her invisibility. Garrett had told her that she needed to improve her nimbleness, and thus far, she hadn't been all too successful. Guinevere frowned. At this rate, she wouldn't be able to help her beloved thief on his next job. The very thought made her shudder. Her desire for Garrett was growing at an unnatural speed, and it both delighted and terrorized her. She had never felt such powerful urges before, and she could not for the life of her understand what they meant. She had a nagging feeling that there was something she was meant to do for him, something that had been decided long ago, engraved into her, and completely beyond even her powers and reasoning. There was only one way to decipher its hidden message, and it came in the form of an ancient relic. This aforementioned object she now sought held all the answers. It had too. With a decisive nod, Guinevere read it herself. Said relic could also be used to better her skills tremendously. She knew that if she was going to be at her best, if she was going to help this city, help Garrett, then there was no other choice. Today, she would take something, without the aid of her magic. Something that she had to leave the city to locate. Her usual jaunt through the city now brought her to the large, ominous city gates. The city key lay just beyond, home to criminals and lepers, and just beyond that was a large forest. Although just outside of town, the forest was virtually unknown and uncharted. Guinevere felt her body shudder. She knew that the rare treasure was indeed within, although it would be pointless to steal it, for it already belonged to her ancestors. Exiting the gates of the city, the young woman ran down the muddy trail that led through the quay and out into the surrounding wood. She remained anonymous to all, and not due to her magic, but rather the teachings of her thief. Shimmering like a beacon through the silver leaves, stood the decaying remains of an old pagan temple. Guinevere stared up at the enormous moss-covered ruin, completely breathless. She remembered that the ruin was large, but that had been years ago. Standing before the majestic dwelling, the young woman could now see that it was gigantic. Its coal-black sandstone design was illuminated by the gentle sunlight, and thick ivy and plant life were both signs that nature had long ago taken back what was rightfully hers. Guinevere pressed her hands against the large stone doors, but to her surprise, she found that they were open. Quietly, she slunk inside and began to look around. The floor was made of marble, and the rest of the inner temple was obsidian grey. Dusty tomes written in a dead tongue lined the walls, and a long, moth-eaten silver rug lined the path ahead of her. It started at the door, before trailing off into the unknown darkness. The final feature that she could make out was a large stone altar towards the center of the room. A sickly natural lighting was flooding down from a star-shaped carving in the ceiling. Guinevere looked around for any signs of life. There shouldn't be anyone here, but with the door open, she was playing it cautious. Oh, if only Garrett knew what she did during the daylight hours, let alone what she was up to now. Guinevere smirked. He would be furious. Suddenly, from behind her, Guinevere heard a low growl. She instinctively whirled around to face the oncoming threat. A brilliant green light flashed from within her palms, and her eyes narrowed. From around the corner of the dimly lit room, a tall man with a thick brown beard and shoulder-length hair walked into view. He glared at Guinevere, who stood firmly facing him. The newcomer pulled free a nasty-looking blade, returning the young woman's threat. There was a long silence as the two stared at each other, ready to attack if necessary. The huge man looked down upon the young girl who had just entered the forbidden sanctum. The temple he alone had been sworn to guard. She looked to be nothing more than a helpless child, barely a woman. Only her large breasts, and the way she stood fearlessly before him, marked her as a full-fledged adult, and furthermore, a dangerous one.
What are you doing here? It's dangerous to come through the forest without any protection.
He addressed her. His voice was low and foreboding. Guinevere began to frown, furious to find someone else here.
I'd like to ask you the same question,
she snapped.
That is none of your concern. You're trespassing on ancient pagan territory. Leave now.
The young woman's posture stiffened. Her eyes began to glow a deep red hue. Facing the man, she spoke in a rumbling, guttural voice.
Oh, do you not even know who I am?
Before he could answer, a blaze of green energy surged forth from her palms, thrusting into the man, and causing him to be thrown backwards. He hit the rock wall with a crack. A painful landing, but far from fatal. Through blurred vision, he looked up at the young woman before him. His jaw dropped as the emerald swirls diminished back into the recesses of Guinevere's body.
You? You're...
Yes, I am.
The young woman then smiled her usual, innocent grin.